Right guys, welcome to today's lecture. We're going to be looking at support material 6, which is FIN3702. We're going to recap one or two things from the previous week, and then we'll cover the new material. This is a short section. We're looking at a few calculations in terms of debtors, sales, change in investment in accounts receivable, and also looking at cost of capital. Alright, so let's get right into it. First bit, just a bit of recap from last week. We spoke about inventory management and we looked at a few workings. Obviously, the main working that we looked at was this, EOQ. What does EOQ stand for? Economic order quantity. Alright, so the EOQ tells you the most optimum place, right, in terms of minimizing total costs. Okay, so holding costs obviously increase with more stock or units that you purchase. Ordering costs will decrease, okay, with more purchases, purely because bulk purchases are cheaper, right? So the ordering costs for more goods would be less than the holding costs, right, if units had to increase. Okay, so the one slopes up and the one slopes down. At some point they intersect, and that's called the economic order quantity. Okay, so that's where businesses should be placing orders. Right, we looked at the equation. The equation for EOQ is 2 times the unit or the demand, okay, times the ordering cost over the carrying cost. Right, as long as you keep the units the same, you'll be able to work it out quite easily. Right, we also spoke about reorder point. What is reorder point? Well, it's the lead time that it takes for your business to receive goods from a particular supplier, obviously multiplied by the daily usage. Alright, so in study unit 1, we covered a lot in terms of the analysis of the firm's cash flow. We then moved to financial planning. We looked at a bit of budgeting. We looked at net working capital. We looked at the cash conversion cycle and inventory management. Right now, in this particular module, we're focusing on this bubble. Okay, the trade receivables, the receipts, and the disbursements. Okay, so we're looking at how do we better manage the ACP. Okay, remember ACP stands for average collection period. ACP was part of your cash conversion cycle. Right, remember the triple C was your ACP plus your AAI minus your APP. Right, so your cash conversion cycle is dependent on 3 components. Okay, your collections, obviously your inventory, and your payments. All right, so in this particular module this week, okay, we're going to be looking at the average collection period. Alright, so study unit 6, trade receivables, receipts, and disbursements. Today we're going to be looking at demonstrating the knowledge, okay, of credit and why credit is important and how can it be valuable to the company. We'll also look at good and bad credit. Okay, there are obviously 2 types. We need to look at managing credit as best we can. We need to look at quantitative measures, okay, in terms of working out discounts. Okay, so is it worth utilizing a discount? If we don't utilize a discount, what sort of cost do we forego? Well, we'll look at a little bit of credit selection techniques and how companies determine the credit worthiness of customers. We'll look at the impact of a change in credit standards from profit or from sales. We'll look at interpretation a bit. Okay, obviously we need to do analysis. Then we'll explain credit monitoring strategies, and then we'll finally discuss the management of receipts and disbursements. Okay, so that's pretty much what the scope is for this particular unit. Okay, focusing again on trade receivables, receipts, and disbursements. Okay, remember, focusing on the ACP. Okay, the cash conversion cycle has different components. This particular component is looking at the debtors. Okay guys, so to start off, I want you guys to think about these 3 questions. Okay, so take a minute or 2 to jot down what you think, okay, for each of these particular questions. Okay, so let's start off with the first one. Okay, so how do companies generate profit? Okay, well, companies are going to be either selling goods or services. Right, so the goods we looked at last week in terms of the inventory and the management of inventory. Okay, obviously services, it's a bit easier to cater for a service than it is for goods, purely because there aren't as much, let's say, working capital cost that you would need to incur in terms of buying stock, storing stock, and then obviously selling stock as well. Okay, right, so can companies increase profits? The question is definitely yes. Right, how do companies do that? They offer credit. Okay, credit is probably the easiest way of increasing your sales, okay, without changing anything else in the business, right? And that does create a problem purely because, yes, you're increasing sales, so you're increasing profit, but you're going to negatively affect your cash flow purely because you've got more debtors. Okay, so companies don't want too much debtors on hand purely because the more debtors you have on hand, right, the more risk you carry as the business, purely because you're going to have to be subsidizing your customer in terms of financing their purchase. Right, so what risks are associated with offering credit? Biggest risk is definitely bad debt. Okay, or credit losses. Okay, so companies obviously don't want to write off customers that can't pay. But that's a reality. You are going to have a certain amount of customers that aren't going to pay for whatever reasons. Right, so this particular module is focusing on that. Okay, the collections, right, and the possible bad debt that could arise, okay, and ways to incentivize early payments. Alright, so in the introduction, okay, we spoke about cash conversion cycle. Right, that's always a focus purely because we're looking at what? Net working capital. Okay, with net working capital, we need to manage our cash flow in terms of what comes in. Right, and what comes in is dependent on our debtors' ability to pay. Okay, or our ability to collect. Okay, so debtors are obviously going to pay cash, and that's going to be seen as an inflow for the business. Right, so you want to see your debtors decrease, because your debtors decrease, that's an inflow in cash flow, or inflow in cash terms. All right. Okay, so there's two parts of the ACP. Okay, the first is the time from the sale until the customer mails the payment, and then we'll also be looking at the time from when the payment is mailed until the firm has collected funds. Okay, so remember, the collection is probably the most important. Right, because that's when the company then changes their debtors, okay, back into cash. Right, and hence the cash conversion cycle. Right, we're taking debt and we're changing it in, from one type of, let's say, component in terms of an asset into another. Okay, so the asset is obviously debtors. Debtors is an asset, it's a current asset. Obviously, debtors needs to be converted back into cash. Okay, we know cash is a current asset as well. Right, so we're changing the form. Okay, inventory is a current asset, cash is a current asset, debt is a current asset. Okay, but remember, we need all three in terms of the cash conversion cycle. Okay, inventory is bought on credit, which creates debtors. Debtors are then responsible for paying, and that converts them as the debtor back into cash. Right, we'll obviously use the cash to either settle outstanding debt in the form of creditors, or maybe to buy more stock for that particular business. Alright, so a debate here. Is credit good or bad? Okay, there are two different arguments for and against. Alright, so again, take a minute or two just to jot down one or 2 points. Right, why do you think credit is good and why do you think credit is bad? Okay, alright, so let's look at some of the good points. Okay, obviously I've given a picture here in terms of leverage. Okay, doing more with less. Alright, credit is good. Why? Well, remember, companies need to finance the purchase of certain items in order to keep operating. Okay, and that could be in the form of large items of equipment, land and buildings, vehicles, and those types of, let's say, fixed assets that would generate increased capacity. Okay, so obviously credit is good if we're financing long-term fixed assets, because that should add to our capacity. We're not going to not operate because you don't have those items of equipment or machines. Okay, we need to purchase those items of equipment and machine in order to operate. Okay, and companies do that by looking at leverage. Okay, another reason for leverage in terms of short term. Okay, so we're looking at debtors. Okay, short term, right? Leverage allows us to what? Increase our profit. Okay, that could be seen as good. Okay, leverage has a way of maximizing profit. Why? You're using someone else's capital in order to finance your purchase as an entity, as a business, right, in order to operate. Okay, so profit can be maximized by introducing debt. Okay, debt is also important for operations. Okay, cash flow. Right, so credit actually provides you with more liquidity. Okay, if you have more credit on hand, you would have more cash to settle certain, let's say, operational costs. Alright, so credit can be good purely because it gives you the ability to do more without actually having those resources. Okay, that's why lending or borrowing, okay, is such an important component of the economy. Okay, reasons why credit is bad. Okay, obviously we don't want that. Okay, no one ever wants to be caught up in debt. Okay, we know debt is what? Total liabilities. Okay, and from an accounting point of view, you know owner's equity is equal to A minus L. Right, so the biggest problem, okay, with not generating wealth is taking out too much credit. The more credit you have, the less net worth or wealth you have as a company, okay, an entity. Right, so companies need to obviously manage the debt, the liabilities. Right, why? Because there's insolvency. That's a reality that can arise. There could also be other reasons such as risk. Okay, companies need to reduce risk and maximize return. If we're introducing more risk, that's going to increase the amount of, if we're increasing more debt, okay, that's going to increase the amount of risk in that particular business. Okay, so there's pros and cons for both good reasons for debt being good and reasons for debt being bad. Okay, the main thing that this slide is trying to convey or express, okay, is your ability to manage it. Okay, so how do we manage credit? How do we make credit good for the business rather than it being bad? Right, so why do companies need to process a credit application? Well, obviously it's a way of selection. Okay, or screening. Right, so companies obviously need to process an application because they can't give credit to everyone. Right, all customers that are deserving of credit, okay, will be getting credit. Okay, are all customers deserving of it? The answer is obviously no. All right, some customers might be seen as being too high risk and they're not going to be allowed to access credit. Right, credit selection and standards, the 5 C's of credit: character, capacity, capital, collateral, and conditions. Okay, those are the 5 C's that the textbook expresses and conveys in the chapter, okay, in terms of the application process. Okay, so obviously companies need to have some sort of view, right, on an applicant's character, their capacity, their capital, their collateral, and the conditions, right, as part of that agreement. Okay, and that will determine whether or not that particular business is going to select that individual or business as a potential applicant, okay, to take out credit for that particular entity. Okay, so you're creating debtors, okay, or debtors are being created depending on your policy. Okay, so if your policy is more lax, okay, or more open to people applying for credit, okay, you'll obviously have a lot more debtors, which creates more risk for your particular business. Right, obviously we need businesses that are competitive, and competitive businesses need to have favorable credit terms. Okay, you don't want to purchase from a supplier which isn't willing to give you credit. Okay, so think from a customer's point of view, there's always 2 sides to every business transaction. Okay, in this particular transaction, we're looking at a credit agreement, okay, between the business and its customers. Right, there's a note here about scoring. Okay, remember everything needs to be quantified. Alright, so a credit score is a way to measure someone's ability to take on credit, manage it appropriately, and obviously pay back in the future. Right, so credit scoring is a measurement system for understanding the customer. Obviously, the credit score is dependent on the customer's payment history, the amount that that they've taken out in terms of loans, the length of the agreement perhaps. There could be new credit that could be issued, or existing customers or new customers, types of credit, what are they trying to apply for, and so on. Okay, all of that would be consolidated into a measure, okay, a credit score, and that'll determine how risky that particular applicant is in terms of extending credit to that customer. Okay, what effect will changing standards have on a business? Well, there are multiple. Okay, obviously, if I'm going to have more, let's say, a policy that's more accommodating, okay, so whereby anyone who is willing to apply and take out credit would be granted it. Okay, that creates a problem. Obviously, we have the National Credit Act, okay, the NCA, right, and the NCA obviously helps protect the consumer against over-indebtedness. But that's the main purpose why we have that particular form of legislation, right? But if we're just looking at credit standards, okay, if I change the credit standards, what effect will that have on the business? Well, if I reduce the credit standards and I make it easier to get credit, obviously sales are going to increase. Okay, but if more people take out credit, I'm probably going to have more bad debt. Okay, so sales go up, but bad debt also goes up. Right? Is the increase in sales going to offset bad debt? Well, we're going to have to see. We're going to have to do some sort of calculation. Right, and that's what the credit standard is looking at focusing on. Okay, it's the ability for customers to pay. Right, so if we change our credit standard, that'll definitely affect the business. Right, so there's a really good example in your textbook. Okay, I've referenced that over here. Example page 581. Okay, in your textbook, please have a look at it. They take you through a really good example covering these different formulas, okay, using the average investment in trade receivables, which is your total variable cost of your annual sales, divided by your turnover of your trade receivables. Okay, and obviously turnover of trade receivables will then be calculated from your 365 over your ACP, okay, your average collection period. Right, so we definitely need to do this calculation first. Why? Because that's substituted into that equation. Okay, just a note over here, when managing working capital, we must consider debtors, okay, and financing consequences of the decisions that are being made. Okay, remember, you might think offering credit is pretty easy decision to make. Okay, why wouldn't a company offer credit? Okay, well, companies wouldn't want to offer credit because it's definitely going to put a burden on them in terms of the average investment in trade receivables. Right, and what does that mean? Well, think about it. Okay, if you as a business, if you are going to be selling goods to a customer on credit, you are going to have to finance the purchase of that item, which you are going to then give to the customer without any payment today. Right, and if you give the customer very favorable terms, they might only have to pay in maybe 30 days or 60 days or even 90 days. Right, if that's the case, what are you actually doing? Well, you're financing their purchase for the next 30, 60 or 90 days. Okay, and that creates a cash flow problem for that particular business. Alright, just to continue with the calculation, okay, from page 581, okay, there's also a note here about sales. Okay, so are the sales going to go up or are the sales going to go down, depending on what you do to your policy? Are we going to make it easier or more difficult to take out credit? Remember, if credit is more readily available, your sale will definitely go up. But your cost of marginal investment, i.e. what you're going to have to invest, okay, in stock and operations, okay, to obviously generate more sales, and will be taken off against that sale. Okay, so we're looking at the net amount. Right, and if bad debts had to go up, we would also subtract that, the cost of marginal bad debts. Marginal, remember, refers to the next. Okay, so if I do implement the policy, what's going to happen? Right, and then the final answer is going to be the net. Okay, so your additional sales profit minus your marginal investment minus the marginal bad debts will give you a net profit. If that's a positive amount, right, or a negative amount, right, we'll then decide on whether or not to accept or reject that particular policy, okay, or credit plan. Right, obviously, companies would choose to go ahead with the plan, right, if it will generate more value for shareholders. Alright, so I've just shown the working there from page 581. Okay, it's in your textbook, so you can see it there. I've just tried to put some numbers to this particular example just so it makes more sense. Right, so let's assume that the additional profit goes up by plus 120, but your margin investment will increase. Okay, so minus the increase, minus the plus is a minus, and then minus the increase in bad debt. Okay, bad debt goes up, which is bad for the overall plan. Right, and the net effect is that. Okay, so looking at this, would the company implement the plan? Definitely. Okay. The textbook also talks about international types of businesses. Okay, so businesses that are in the import and export business. Right, for international credit, okay, you do need to apply outside of the country. Okay, obviously the bond market will assist you with doing that. Right, in this particular module, from a test point of view, an exam point of view, you're not going to see international companies, but it's going to be focused on local. Okay, so South African businesses operating in a South African context. Right, so the only note that I need to maybe mention here for you guys for future reference is appreciation and depreciation of currency. Okay. Which is better? Well, obviously, depending on whether you're the importer or the exporter, okay, you would either want the currency to strengthen or weaken. Okay, so if we're exporting, okay, if we're exporting goods to other countries, right, we actually want the rand to weaken. Why? Well, because if we're selling those goods in other countries, we want to be able to exchange that foreign currency into more rands when we bring that foreign currency back into the country. Okay, obviously if we're an importer, so if we're importing goods and not exporting goods, okay, remember if I'm exporting goods, right, I want to convert the funds that I'm going to be receiving overseas, right, to be converted into more rands. Okay, so I want a weaker currency. Okay, but if I'm looking at importing, right, then the opposite needs to be true. Okay, so I want a stronger rand. Why? Because if I'm importing, I'm going to be buying someone else's goods from abroad. Okay, so if I'm buying someone else's goods from abroad, I want a stronger currency. Why? I want my rands to buy a lot more dollars or pounds or whatever the currency might be, okay, in order to import more goods. Right, so which is better? There is no better option, appreciation or depreciation. Okay, depending on your strategy, depending on whether you're an importer or exporter, right, that will obviously affect your decision making in terms of what would you prefer the currency to do. Increase or decrease in value. Right, there's the note about international credit management. We just spoke about it. Currency is the most important risk that companies need to deal with in terms of foreign, let's say, foreign transactions, okay, transactions that take place with companies abroad. Alright guys, then the last bit here in terms of a calculation, okay, is the cash discount. Okay, you do need to be familiar with how to calculate a discount, especially the cost of foregoing a discount. Right, so if I'm looking at speeding up collections, what am I going to be doing? Right, I'm going to be incentivizing early payments. Okay, I as the supplier of credit would want customers to pay earlier rather than later. Okay, so this particular formula is working out the cash discount, okay, the cost of giving up the cash discount. Okay, CD stands for the cash discount, N is for the number of days foregone. Right, a cash discount will reduce the net profit or gains from offering credit but assists in reducing bad debt. Okay, remember there's a trade-off. Okay, are we going to allow customers to pay early? If we do, all right, we realize cash ahead of time, which is good, but I don't realize as much because I'm giving a discount. But if I wait and I don't give a discount, I might have to write off bad debt. Okay, so do I give a discount or do I write off bad debt? That's a decision that the company needs to make. Okay, so what is better to sustain? Right, a discount or bad debt? Right, there's no right or wrong answer here. Companies need to look at maybe a scenario analysis in order to then determine which is better, giving a discount versus accepting some bad debts. Right, and then we've got a note here about how do businesses want to view credit. Okay, obviously the answer is good. Okay, they want credit to be viewed as good. Right, so how do they do that? Well, there's the answer. Right, they need to monitor it and they need to control it. Okay, so monitoring and control is what? It's the management. Okay, so we're looking at how does one go about managing credit for this particular organization. Okay, and the best way of doing that is by having a view on the credit periods. Okay, doing an age analysis. So what is an age analysis, you might be asking or thinking? Right, an age analysis would be a breakdown of all your customers' outstanding debt. Okay, so what they're owing you as the business. Okay, so you'd have a 30-day, 60-day, 90-day age analysis, and you would then obviously follow up with customers that are problematic in terms of not paying on time. Okay, the ACP obviously gives you an indication of how soon you're able to collect your outstanding amounts. Right, and most important here, if I'm looking at good management, good control, good monitoring, communication is key. Emails, marketing, etc. all needs to take place to make sure you collect those outstanding amounts. Right, then I've got a note here about receipts and disbursements. Okay, if I'm looking at receipts and disbursements, we're either looking at speeding up the collections, okay, or slowing down the payments. Okay, those are two ways to improve cash flow in a particular organization. Okay, companies want to either pay late, okay, because if we pay late, money in our pocket is worth more than money in someone else's, right? And that's why companies would want to try to delay payment as much as possible, so long as you don't incur penalties, fees, and interest. Okay, if that's the case, you're not going to want to postpone your payment. Right, and another area that you need to be concerned about is the collections. Okay, why? The collections refer to your ACP. Your payments refer to the APP. Right, and we know that the cash conversion cycle is the ACP plus the AAI minus the APP. Right, so we obviously want this to be longer or shorter? Longer. Okay, so the longer the period, the better. Why? Well, if I have a longer period, I'll have a bigger APP. If the APP is bigger, I'm going to subtract a bigger amount, which is going to give me a smaller answer. Okay, and the smaller answer, the better. Why? Because the answer here is representing the cash conversion cycle. Right, so most important, remember payment methods and investing in short-term assets. Okay, companies need to have cash on hand to take advantage of opportunities. Right, and that obviously creates a problem, okay, when companies don't have sufficient cash flow. Right, so it's a balancing act. Okay, do we have lots of collections, lots of payments? What's the time frame associated with both? Right, and we need to try to get a, let's say, level in terms of operations where the company can be sustainable over the long term. Alright guys, so that's the end of this particular module. Okay, it's quite theoretical. You will see cash discounts and sales, bad debt, and average investment in receivables coming up at a later stage. So please try to some of the study guide exercises, go through the textbook as well, and if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to ask me. Alright guys, so that's the end of this particular module. Thanks very much.